Welcome to our Bucky call this weekend of July 27, 28. We're going to continue. We're very close. Could finish off critical path either tonight or next week, depending on where we want to go. So we're going to proceed. Tonight, we're going to start on page 376. We're starting with Inventions in 1963. And the book ends with Inventions in 1979. That's 2 pages. Then after that, we have chronological inventory of prominent scientific, technological, economic, and political world events from 1895 to date. That could take us a little while longer. Yeah, that's quite a few pages, and probably it's of interest to us. We've had pretty good interest in the inventions so far. But now we're going to, this appendix number 2 is about economic and political and technological advancements. That goes from page 378 to page 410. So that could be a couple weeks there, with the idea that probably we'd need to find a substitute host on many, if not some of those nights. So that's where we are. We're going to begin with page 376 with Inventions from 1963. That's kind of a little introduction. We're also using Richard's chronology, his chronophile, and which adds a few things and kind of creates an invitation for each of us to put our own personal chronophile, integrate our own chronophile into this discussion. So that's been kind of cool, and that's a few pages yet to go here. So that's good. So that's where we are today. That's where our discussion begins. Anne, how are you feeling, and what do you anticipate to get out of the call today?
First, I want to say I'm grateful, Steve, to Steve for actually holding this the twice a week, the 2 days together, because it takes quite a lot to actually curate and take note of everything and keeping us updated, and the transcribing what happens in the meeting, our recordings. Oh my God, to keep track of all that, that's crazy. So I just want to say thank you very much. And I can't think of a more exciting group of people to be around, than the group that we're in on Wednesday for me, Wednesday and Saturday for you. So always grateful. So today, yes, see, we would love to finish off the 2 pages, and then we can move on to the next one. Okay, right. And Richard, how do you feel, and what do you expect to take away today?
Well, I guess I have mixed feelings, because we got hit really hard in our province with one of the big wildfires, and we've just heard yesterday, I guess, confirmation that of a mountain tourist town that had 1,100 structures, 360 of them are destroyed completely. And that's a lot of small businesses and homes, and it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be, but it's still pretty bad. And so we just had visitors from Indiana who have been here, and they had to cut their travel in that area by half and pivot to another part of the province. But it's been a good learning experience for them too. But it just really is a devastating wildfire experience already, and we're not the only ones, of course, in our part of the world, or in places like California and other regions of the world that are suffering again this summer from these terrible fires. So that really connects me again to wanting to learn and share as much as we all can about Bucky's understanding and Bucky's approach to how we could learn and do things differently, so that we're not just relying on one kind of paradigm from science or elsewhere that dictates to us as to how we should be making our lives better. And that's why I keep really resonating with Anne and her work with the school kids and preparing them for living rather than just preparing them to pass an exam. So yeah, and so Joe, how are you feeling, and what's your hopes for this evening?
I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, I had a very good day. And I too want to extend my gratitude to Steve for all the work that you do on these calls each week. And you know, with the videos, with the uh, just keeping track of things, the scheduling. Uh, you've done a lot not only for this call, but for me as well, personally. So, yeah, I do want to express that gratitude. Uh, and yeah, I'm very sorry, actually, Richard, that some of those things are happening near you. That it is important to consider that somebody's lost everything,
Yeah.
this evening, and so keeping that in mind, and yeah, it's a major issue. I mean, in the United States in particular, that the Forestry Service is one of the most underfunded agencies. And they there's a lot of forestry management that could be done to avoid things like this. So um, yeah, no, it's important to keep that in mind, to keep perspective. Speaking of perspective, to finish out the chronophiles and kind of just it's been an interesting journey. There have been a lot of things on there that I was not aware of. And it's brought things to into my consciousness that I think what Bucky was thinking as well, where his mind was, because you can tell by the things that he recorded. You can start to see a bit of a pattern there of a lot of his interests. So, my expectation is to finish this strong. And, we're getting up to, we're not, almost, when I say almost current day events, it's, still, about 45 years ago, when we finished, but still, it's, it's starting to resonate anyway. Because these are times that, I've heard about a little bit more, and I know that I'm a little bit younger than everybody here, but nonetheless, I'm really excited about getting this, coming to a conclusion and having our takeaways with it. Steve, how do you feel? What would you like to take away from today?
Well, I sure appreciate all your kind words, and I got to tell you that I just so much respect each of you and your contributions and the difference that what you have to say about life and about Buckminster Fuller adds so much to my life. So, and I will, I've looked back every once in a while, and I wonder just exactly what I have organized, and sometimes I'm not very happy because I missed this or missed that, and I have to just today I had to readjust an episode number to keep things going, and I'm not sure how deep that problem goes. So, I've done the best I can do, and I appreciate that. Richard, we heard about those fires down here in Utah, down in the U.S. They were talking about the fires there in Alberta, and I was at a concert event tonight that got canceled because I don't know if you guys remember the Hanson brothers, bebop. Remember that
Oh, yeah,
bebop song?
yeah.
One of those guys was performing down here at a club that I perform at. So I was going to hang out and see what's going on. He was on his way up from California, got caught in a fire that went across the road and shut down I-15 for 5 hours. Shut it. So
How old is he now?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think he's, I don't know. So, but it was the young guy, Matt, the boy, Matt Hanson. Anyway, so the fire slowed him down. So my gosh. And Joe, when you talked about fire maintenance, I guess there was a time for humanity that their lightning could strike in Yellowstone and nobody'd care. Lightning could strike in Alberta, and heck, the cities were here and there, but there's tons of stuff. And but the more people that are on the planet, and the more strained our resources are, because we're not doing what Bucky's talked about from the very beginning, the more appropriate it is for us to look at ways that we can do husbandry, ways we can do livingry, and not be so focused on weaponry. And you just the thought is, well, let the wild forest grow wild, but we can actually integrate that. And the Native Americans used to grow crops in those forests, and they'd rotate those and go through, gather them, and then hoard them up. And what the American soldiers did was they went and found all their storage places and stole all the stuff and burned it.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to they wanted to cripple the Native American survival system, which wasn't centralized anywhere. It was spread. It's kind of like the internet. They would just move along with nature, and it was just bewildering to the white guys. So, but maybe we have an invitation to be better stewards. And of course, that's what this book is all about, Critical Path. And I just
Yeah.
want to confirm. Go ahead, Richard, if you have a thought
Well,
on
I
that.
was just going to say one other thing, that every time there's, a disaster of any kind, sometimes, one of the first things people start to do is, look for who made the mistake, or who got it wrong, and can we point the finger? Well, and when you have press releases, of course, that's what journalists will kind of dig for if they can, I guess. But on this one, they were talking about how this fire came up, and when it hit the town of 6 or 7,000 or so, but there would be 15 or 20,000 there because of visitors. They made it clear that what the firefighters experienced was, they said, 100-meter high flame, and 300 feet.
Oh.
And no sooner had he said that, basically saying that there was nothing we could do about this.
Yeah.
A journalist is asking a question about, well, do you think you'd have planned this differently, or you'd done this differently, that you might have been able to contain that wall of fire? And the guy kind of just shaking his head. Do you understand what 300 feet, that's a 30-story building coming at you, and I'm going to stand there and detour it? You got to, it's just the ridiculousness of how some people think that, well, somebody must have made a mistake, and they should be, sanctioned for it. It's like Anne was saying last week, you're going to get 4 canes to the knuckles. And it's just, but
Yeah.
this idea of a 30-story sort of high flame coming at you, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Just
Mm.
it shakes you to the boots.
Yeah. Actually, there are a lot of comments that go out by people who have no idea the immensity of the issues. Yeah. Like a case in point is fire. The other one are the tidal waves that come, the tsunamis that hit the shores. Because the fire, what you're talking about, right? You're talking about literally a nature being this monster, right? Monster that you cannot control. It's not even a Godzilla. It's literally you cannot. You can't. And there's no one figure. It's like this and like this, and this big. Same thing with hurricanes and everything. They have no clue every time. And then in Malaysia, so sometimes in the papers, my God, it's so embarrassing. The cops, the things they say in the news, like say, we do have issues with if you are at the traffic lights, or you're paused at junctions, sometimes you have these bikes that come by, they break your side windows, and they'll grab your bags, right? This happens in Malaysia. And then what happens is that the cops will say things like, you got to be careful with your, or in the house, right? They say, then people break in and rob the house, and they say that you've got to be careful with your belongings. I'm like, how much more careful can you be when you're in a locked car, windows are up, the houses have got grills, it's got alarm systems, and they still come in, and we have to still take responsibility and be careful with our stuff. You know, it's a kind of thinking that just makes no sense. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. So absolutely true.
Well, to
Yeah.
continue with my my little introduction, I want to come back to the importance of the chronophile. This, in a way, it's kind of like a resume, you know, a resume. So if
Right.
I'm hiring an employee or I have an employee, if I don't look at the resume to see what kind of things they've been involved in. I know Elon Musk likes to ask the question, oh, you've been doing this. Well, what problem did you solve and how did you solve it? That's his interview question. You know, he doesn't care where you've been. He wants to know what kind of problems you've solved and how you've solved them. So you could be in a no place environment, but solve a really cool problem and you get hired by Elon Musk, you know? So, and you could be on, you know, send the next rocket ship to Mars. But the chronology thing is interesting because, as we pointed out, Anne found a book, 101, 1001 Inventions. I think, Richard, you found another book with more inventions. And it's kind of interesting to look at what Bucky noticed, what he thought was important enough to put in his chronophile, and yet what other things are out there. Like Bucky does not put down 1947 Les Paul invents the electric guitar. Bucky did not put that down. But for me, that's a very important chronological event, right? So, and it's kind of interesting. I'm so convinced about it, and I've said this a couple times on the call, I thought about putting some of my experience in my book. It's critical that people understand that I'd been doing transcendental meditation for 12 years before I hit Silva mind control, before I became certified as a clinical hypnotherapist, before I discovered Vipassana, you know, Buddhist meditation, 10 days with a 90 vow of silence, and did 30 of those. I think that any one of those events is powerful, but to notice that this happened after this, and I did this in the context of that, seems to have some merit to the discussion. And there needs to be more conversation about, okay, what's in your chronophile? What is important to you? What has been going? So I love it. So
I think you're right, Steve, if I may. I mean, the idea of, and I've spoken a lot about this lately in general, is the idea of identifying what it is that you value. And by putting down these things, you know, what is meaningful to you at a particular moment in time, certain patterns do emerge. So that, you know, it's not totally dissimilar to Anne's book. It's the idea of self-knowing as part of that. So that's what it is, you know. So yeah, having knowledge of oneself and one's interests. You know, sometimes people allow outside noise to actually drown out what they actually prefer to do, what's important to them. And I think that's where a chronophile actually has, you know, a way of, you know, it's what you find to be important. And yeah, I think that that's actually, it challenges a lot of the, you know, things that we think we should be and actually tells us what we like.
yeah. So really cool. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, good. So that's where we are. And now, just to show you how some days I'm not all that prepared, I'm doing what I can now to find page 376 on my PDF file. Probably you guys all have.
Yep.
And it's only up to page 321, looking for 376. So let's hope it finds 376. Okay, it didn't find it. Okay, there we go. It did find it after all. Hey, that's so. And then I'll bring up Richard's chronophile too, because there are some items here for 1963 in Richard's file as well. So here we go. Okay, and we'll make it a little bit bigger, I think. I think that's plenty readable. Okay, so page 376, 1963. Who wants to start? Who would
I
like to
can
hear
do it.
reading? Okay, go ahead.
Friction welding, discovery of is it Xeno? Um, it's a fundamental atomic particle of antimatter. Measles vaccine perfected. SYNCOM satellites hold position over spinning Earth. Belt of copper needles orbited to test a secure global radio communications system. Quasars discovered. Verrazano narrows. Oh, Verrazano. Narrows bridge, New York, world's longest suspension bridge. That's what happens when you don't look at the next word. Close photos. As soon as I saw the bridge, I was like, Verrazano. Close-up photos of moon surface. Divers live in underwater sea lab for 9 days. That I did not know.
Hmm.
First spacewalks, USA and USSR. Mars photos from 7,000-mile flyby. First use of satellites in TV transmission. Luna 9 instrument package. Oh, you want to stop?
Let's stop at 1966 and take a look at, make any comments on these and take a look at Richard's chronophile as well. Because Bucky doesn't even mention his own writings, and Richard is clever enough to put that in. Any comments on what's here up to 1966? First,
Well,
go ahead.
well, I think it's really fascinating to see in 1963 is when the measles vaccine was perfected. I had no idea that it was that far into this, into that centennial, that before we got the measles vaccination. And then to see in 64 that the suspension bridge, and of course, it always brings out this idea of another sort of tensegrity structure has been constructed. And then to see in 1965, the first use of satellites in TV transmission. I mean, that's really quite incredible. That's 60 years ago, my gosh. And then to see those spacewalks in 65, and then in 68 to see this orbiting of the moon and that Earthrise photo. And then the following year, 69, the first humans on the moon. I mean, what an incredible acceleration of developments in those early 60 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The 60s, okay, they're like a renaissance kind of. I mean, there's so much happening there. And I know that go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, and I realize it's a lot to do with space, you know. Prior to that, a lot of the inventions and all that was kind of on the ground, and then of course the planes and all that, which is the skies. But I think the 60s was the age of space, yeah, space travel. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, there was a space race, and that's one of those things where now that there's the example of the book, the moonshot economy, essentially, and it just talks about how we had set a goal to get to the moon, and a lot of the benefits that had the spillover effects, so to speak, that occurred as a result of that. And so, yeah, obviously even, satellites, things like that. But it is important to note also there was we had a period there where we did stall. Uh, so it shows you that bureaucratic structures can get in the way a little bit at certain points. Yeah, and that space program was actually took a lot of fortitude because they actually had lost people in the sense that during the um, testing phase. And a lot of it had to do with communication, organizational communication. And I'll just say really quickly about the Arizona Bridge. As Richard had mentioned, as the idea of tensegrity comes up, and obviously that's the first thing I think of as well. But I also, had seen an example of where how they used a bridge as an example of doing more with less. In the sense that how we've become more effective in how we actually construct bridges. And so, and by using a lot of the ideas from tensegrity. So, yeah, anyway, these are some of these fundamental principles that Bucky has talked about, and you can actually see them in the structures that that we're talking about right now.
Well, the other thing when you think about it right now in terms of wildfires and whirlwinds and you think of what's happened from last Sunday to this Saturday in American politics. And then we will go back to these 60s, 1963, when we barely got to Montreal and got settled there in November, and Kennedy is killed. And then in 1968, we lose Martin Luther King, and then we lose Kennedy. And here we've got, within the past 2 or 3 weeks, we've got an assassination attempt. We've got an absolute whirlwind of change from last Sunday until now. Wow.
Yeah,
And-
there's one. Sorry.
Go ahead, Ann.
There's something I just want to check because a friend of mine who moved from Australia to live in US for the past maybe 15 years there, and so he's got a child, and he told me that because I'm looking at the vaccine, right, the measles vaccine. I was trying to figure out whether when I was born in 62, whether we had that already, or it was 6 years later that we, at the age of 6, and we went back to have additional vaccines, right? So, but the thing is that in total, I think in Malaysia, we have about 6 vaccines, 6 different types of maybe to the maximum. We're talking about ovarian, like ovarian, no, not ovarian. What's that? The cancer that requires a jab. Anyway,
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
Yes, cervical cancer, right? You need a jab, right? A jab can actually protect vaccine. I think maybe 10. So, but what I heard from him is that children from young until a certain age in the US, they have something like 200 over vaccinations. Oh, it was in the hundreds.
There
That
are
true?
62 vaccinations required before a child is 3 years old. And
What?
most of them are given the first year. They're
What?
even little infants are vaccinated for hepatitis C or something. And the only way they can catch hepatitis C is by injecting drugs, or if their mother had it. And yet all babies are given hepatitis C unless the parents protest. They're given a battery of 62 drugs for stupid stuff. It's crazy.
I see. Okay. So I really know that because over here we keep hearing about the anti-vaxxers, right? So people won't allow their children to be vaccinated because of the worry about what they call the challenges, mentally and all that, and
Yeah,
physically.
the autism syndrome, yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was, no wonder. Okay, okay. I just wanted to
And I
clarify.
think, Ann, you're probably right about 600 drugs. In other words, if I'm in a culture where there are 6 or 7
Mhm.
vaccines out there that are life-saving, like measles and mumps, you know, um, and then to hear that people in America don't want to take vaccines and they're anti-vaxxers, nobody says, yeah, there are 600 vaccines out here that the pharmaceuticals are trying to drive down our throats. And
Mm.
and the problem is that there have been no, well, and I've been, because RFK is big on this thing. He's written a book on it. He has a book called On Fauci and on just the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. And he doesn't draw any conclusions. He has a barcode down there so you can scan in and go to any source of his things. But it's just really ridiculous how the pharmacies in America have lobbied at Congress so they're not liable for any kind of damages. So if you take a vaccine and you get killed, you can't sue them. Now, there are still, in spite of that law, there are billions of dollars a year paid by vaccine companies for negligence and for bad stuff. And we've all heard about the opiate issues, right? It's very complicated. And yeah, I can understand in Malaysia, you've got 7 vaccines. Then you hear about these parents who don't want to get their kids vaccinated. I'm sure somebody in Malaysia goes, what the hell is wrong with those Americans?
Yes, that's what goes through our head. This is
But
life-saving.
RFK points out that some of those vaccines were studied back in the 50s, but now when you give a little infant 62 vaccines, and they have what's called an antigen in each one of these vaccines. An antigen is a highly toxic substance like mercury or some other
Wow.
substance that it's injected with the antivirus or with the antibacterial agent. And because it's so toxic, it basically puts the immune system into a kind of a chaotic state so that the vaccine can take effect. There are things called antigens, and that's the issue. And anti-vaxxers say, well, look, nobody's ever studied when you give a kid 62 vaccines and you're giving them antigens, and all 62 of those is there a buildup of those antigens? What happened? You know, why is it working? And then we've got autism now. 1 in 34 adults and born in America, 1 out of 34 children in America have autism. Where back in 1975, it was 1 out of 10,000. So something's going on.
Mm.
And it ain't what it is ain't exactly clear. But there's a man with a gun over there telling me that I got to be, oh, I'm sorry, that was Stephen Stills and Buffalo Springfield for what it's worth. I'm sorry, I got into a little thing there. That was supposed to be kind of humorous, but anyway. But that's what the anti-vax thing is about.
Wow.
There's much more to it. And if Susan were on the phone on this call,
Oh,
she
we
would
should bring.
go rant right now.
Yeah, we should
she's
find out from her.
Yeah, she's a doctor who really can, says there are things that are going on that don't make much sense.
Okay, guys, thank you so much, but I have to run because there's orientation going on in the school. I thought it was at 2, but it's at 1, so I'm gonna have to go get ready for it. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you Wednesday.
Very good day, Dan.
You too, you too.
Okay. So what Richard points out that in 63, Buckminster Fuller, Ideas and Integrities, a spontaneous autobiographical disclosure was published. He didn't put that in here. And phase 1 document inventory of world resources, human trends and needs. I'm sure that was discussed in the book, but it's not listed here. And who joins Red Deer Toastmasters? Is that you that joins Red Deer Toastmasters, Richard?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's put that down here. Richard Ramsey joins. So you want to share some of this? You got married as well?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and you can see right at the top there, 1963, it says friction welding. I don't know if that sort of is parallel to marriage or not.
Oh.
As a psychologist, Richard, I think you're qualified to make that diagnosis.
Yeah. No, that was and the Toastmasters one was very interesting for me because um, later on I realized that there's a lot of people like to join the service clubs like the Kiwanis and the Rotary and the Lions and we've got groups up here called the Elks uh, and they're all raising money for good causes like nonprofit sort of charitable organizations. But I thought, well, since I work for one all day long, why would I go and join someone uh, and continue to do the same thing in the evening? So I decided to join Toastmasters in order for self-improvement as opposed to, if you want, other improvement. And that was one of the best decisions I made in my young life to uh, to learn a bit about public speaking, and at the same time learn an awful lot about the art and skill, if you want, or science of parliamentary procedure. Um, and it's fascinating to see how that unfolds at a local level in terms of just an ordinary club activity of some kind, and how it unplays itself, if you want, at the so-called justice and political level, when you see all the maneuverings that are going on, the way in which people take advantage in some senses of every nuance of the law in either to, put their case forward to prosecute a case or to defend against the prosecution of the case. It's really quite a chess game, and I don't know whether well, obviously, it's um, it's not fair in all cases. In many situations, the least sort of able person ends up getting the biggest stick of the law thrown at them, and the ones that are the most capable, at least funding wise, um, get away with what some people will think is the crime in itself. Yeah. So it's pretty hard to figure out a justice system that works across all levels and is fair uh, at all times and all places for all people.
You mentioned parliamentary procedures. You guys use Robert's rules?
That's what we learned on. Yeah.
Yeah, I used it too.
Yeah.
You get
and we
married. Go ahead.
and we practiced all the different ways in which you could either utilize the rule if you were a participant, and if you were sort of like the leader or the chairman of a meeting, you learned them in order to do one of two things. One is buffer the challenge from a participant if they appeared to be a little bit smarter than you were.
Yeah.
Or if you were the chair and you knew your audience was really not conversant at all in it, then you could use your knowledge to actually teach them on the spot so that they didn't sort of over um, identify with powers that you didn't really have as a chairperson, but they think you do, or whether as a chairperson you've got more power than the participant has, but you curb yourself from overusing it or taking advantage of the ignorance of your participants. You actually teach them on the go, and it's almost like what Anne was talking about in terms of the principle of teaching, of helping people grow as opposed to sort of do them in. And it also helped me understand the principle of facilitation over uh, divide and conquer or win over and conquer.
Gotcha. So you got married in May of '63, evidently.
Yes.
And I graduated from high school in May of '63.
Wow.
Then in September, you started your graduate studies.
Yeah,
I started going to BYU in fall of '63.
packed everything we owned in our 57 Ford and left Calgary and headed for Montreal, having no idea where we were going to end up or stay, or it was quite an adventure.
Yeah, I went to BYU. I had 6 minors, no majors. It took me 6 years to get out with my 6 minors.
Well,
And that was the year John F. Kennedy. I remember walking on campus and hearing that John F. Kennedy was shot. Where were you?
I was in a classroom. It was a dark and gray, dingy day in eastern Canada, Montreal. Wondering, how soon is this class going to be over so I get the hell out of here, because it was a boring afternoon. And then all of a sudden, the world lit up, and my wife was nursing at a big hospital in Montreal, and one of the patients heard it, and she was working on a surgery ward, but he literally was out of bed and running down the aisle saying, just screaming at the top of his lungs that the president had been killed. The president had been killed. Yeah.
Wow. And that's still not resolved today. Joe, where were you when Kennedy was shot?
I was a mere thought. At
Oh,
that
you were a
point.
thought? You were a
Yeah.
thought to your parents.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I'm sorry,
I-
Joe.
no, it's one of, I know, it's one of those events. Actually, I was talking to somebody today, actually, CJ's significant others, and about how kids today that are graduating college, weren't around for 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
it's like, so it's um no, it's amazing how fast time goes by. Um, because I feel like that was yesterday to me. Uh, I'll just really comment really quickly. I really think that in general, as far as Toastmasters goes and the ability to, speak, um, I really believe that the idea of rhetoric in the traditional sense and how it was taught at at one time, that needs to be brought back so that students are able to identify when they're being manipulated, or when when arguments are being made to um, from a specific position, or, when they're being fed information, more importantly, that they're able to actually discern. I don't know, it's hard to say what is truth, but what is, at least more valid. I'll just say that, because, truth is a strong word. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of the idea of speaking and public speaking. I remember Warren Buffett actually felt like his Toastmasters was one of his great accomplishments. But number two is that just in general, being able uh, to understand the structure of an argument, as Richard was saying a little bit about the justice system. I think that that's a really important part of education, and it needs to be brought back. Um, because I think right now we don't have a lot of dialogue, obviously. So the ability even to structure an argument has been lost with, basically these Facebook posts.
Well, absolutely, that's
Yeah.
true. People react to non-thoughts. What is Drop City, Richard? Drop City, a counterculture commune. What was that?
Yeah, that was something that emerged in Colorado. Um, Sort of the hippie movement set up a commune kind of system, and I forget the name of the town now, um, in Colorado. And for,
Trinidad. You have down here Trinidad, Colorado.
yeah, Trinidad, that's right. Um, and they, a lot of them constructed their lean-to and makeshift shelters in a geodesic sort of pattern. And for some reason or another, Bucky Fuller, even though he was never dressed in anything other than a shirt and tie and business suit, became their sort of icon, their symbol of the future.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, it's quite fascinating. Um, and apparently, there's still remnants of that drop city in that Trinidad that area. Some of the Trim Tab book club people who live in Colorado know more about it than I do, and have been there in recent times as well.
Hmm.
What's this about Stuart Brand?
Yeah, I mean, he had the whole Earth catalog, correct?
Right.
Oh, he was the whole Earth catalog dude?
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Yeah, I was into that in a big way. I was into the LA Free Press and the whole Earth catalog. Now, ponders Fuller's argument that the Earth is perceived as flat. In other words, Fuller argued that other people see the Earth as flat and that the resources are unlimited, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so Brand decides that he's going to refute the flat Earth idea by showing pictures of Earth from outer space that were not yet
Yeah.
available. I can right now in my idea, in my mind's eye, I can see the whole Earth catalog. I can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
here
it's
it is.
interesting now when you look at that in terms of 1968 or 66, and then you look at this other um, orbiting of the moon in 1968, which produced that film or the photograph. But it's 2 years earlier where Brandt and others are making the case, well, why aren't we being given pictures of the Earth as a sphere and not as a flat Earth? Um, and so if somewhere along the line, he must have then eventually put out that Earthrise photo.
You
I'm
can buy
sure.
this book. You can buy this book for $281.99. It's used.
Yeah, it's like the collector's item now.
Sure it is. Wow.
But is that considered the first edition?
I don't know. It's considered to be worth
Yeah.
$281.
Well,
Well, that's a good question. What year was the first edition?
well, if we're looking at the chronophile, you would think it's somewhere around 66 or 67.
Right, and that was a 1970 catalog, so that's a
Yeah.
40-year-old catalog. It's out of date.
But
All right.
that's where in 66 so there must have been photographs from outer space. Um, and he's saying, why aren't they being shown to us?
Yeah. Very interesting. What was the significance of the United Church congregation that you
Well,
felt?
what was significant for me is that because I was um, engaged in Toastmasters, and I was the head of a small agency that belonged to the United Way, the fundraising organization. I was often invited to be a guest speaker at, a company or someplace to promote giving in the fall. And then in our centennial year, one of the largest churches in congregations in the city of Ottawa had 4 guest speakers over the course of the year. And one of them was our former prime minister, and the other one was me. So I thought that pretty proud of the fact that I got to take the podium along with the prime minister. But the real significant thing for me is that I was in front of about maybe 500 people, and I was on the the podium of a church. So I'm above everybody, looking down to the audience, and that's when I realized the power of height, if you want, the power that can surge into your body when you see yourself, standing above an audience and if you want, preaching to them. And it gave me a different appreciation for um, why great orators are who they are, because in a sense they're on elevated shoes, and it gives them a much greater sort of sense of power and probably authenticity and all kinds of things to get out there and try and influence and convince an audience to think presumably in your way of thinking. And in some ways it's really unfair because it gives a person in that kind of position, in other words, the weekly church leader or minister, an advantage over you that you don't have in a in a equitable sense with the minister. So it's hard to dialogue, um, and it's probably much easier to be compliant. And so I suspect churches and podiums were designed that way for a reason.
For a reason, absolutely right. And to have a first-hand experience of that is very powerful. It's an epiphany for sure.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it really was an eye-opener in terms of how easy one can allow what's that sort of power to go to your head rather than to use it for the good of others, as opposed to championing just your own cause.
Yeah, and I can understand that, I've been on a podium as a national speaker, and it's amazing the number of people who I feel like started believing their own bullshit, you know,
Mm.
just because they're up there and people are listening to them, so they think they must be important.
Right. Yeah.
If people are listening to me, I must be important, and so what I say must be important. So
Right.
listen to me. Ugh. Yeah. Any other thing you want to mention here? Because I'm sure we've all been reading about this. You mentioned your starting salary back there was $5,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can, in the last 10 years, if I wasn't making 5,000 a month, I wasn't making any money.
Yeah. Well, the other one, where you got the arrow now in 1966, I was 25 years old, and I was asked to apply for a branch director job after only being in the field for about 2 years, maybe. So I didn't feel I was ready for it, but my boss, who was a World War II veteran, convinced me that I should do it. And then when my application went before the board of directors in this other agency, the board were impressed apparently with what was on paper, but they weren't impressed with the age. they thought that I was way too young, and so that's when he told them the story of taking kids off the farm uh, in the early days of World War II, and he was the captain of a frigate or something, but saying that everybody had to take night watch at some point, and when you were on night watch, you were in charge of the ship. And he said these kids did fine. So he made it a point of saying to the board, you can reject the kid, this young guy for whatever reason you want, but don't do it on his age. um, and and I caught myself uh, about 10 years later when I was in a hiring kind of role and had young people coming out of university at 21 or so wanting a job in my work at that point, and I didn't want to hire them because they were too young. and, and all of a sudden I remembered what happened to me and decided I better change my tune. uh, if if it was good for the board to consider me without taking into account my age, then maybe I better do the same thing with these young people coming out of university. They might be a lot better than I think their age says they are. So that was another important lesson learned.
Yeah, beautiful. So now we kind of hit 66. It's kind of where we cut you off. Joe, do you want to read down through 66? Then we'll go back to the other one.
Sure. Luna 9 instrument package makes soft landing on the moon. Bubble memories for computers. Docking of 2 unmanned spacecraft. 2.5 million year old human bone fragments. DNA virus synthesized. Human heart transplant. Buckminster Fuller tetrahedral floating city project. I was going to say, like, yes, yeah, I thought we got all the way up to 68 last week, but that was, I didn't want to bring that up. Um, uh, um, Mendelevin, 258, heaviest element yet known, discovered. Chromium dioxide, magnetic tape, double information storage capacity.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you remember when IBM had those,
CD.
what's that?
Well, is chromium dioxide
Magnetic tape.
but it's a CD then? Is that what
No, chromium dioxide was a special chemical they used to make magnetic tape. That was a big deal in
okay.
radio. We'd use that in radio in the 70s is a big deal. And then IBM came out with their like a strip, and you could load that strip into a thing like a teller type machine, and the IBM Selectric typewriter would type automatically.
Oh.
So that's chromium dioxide magnetic tape. That's doubling information capacity.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And how far did you get down, Joe?
That was it. First men orbit moon. Pulsars first detected. Integrated circuits. Ribonuclease molecules synthesized. Go ahead.
Ribonucleic viruses, yeah.
Okay.
So, and that kind of ends 1968. Let's catch up with Richards. We left off in 66. Collect. Oh, geez, what just happened? Hang on. Okay, there. 67, 1 of 4, including prime minister. That's where you get to give your talk, right? Get the American geodesic dome at the U.S. Pavilion at Montreal Expo. Bucky talked about that in his book. but he didn't list it on the important events.
No, and what's really interesting on that one is that Richard Smalley and Harold Kroto, two of the discoverers of carbon-60 um, later in the 80s, they both visited Montreal Expo, unknown to each other at the time, and at different times in that 6 months of the expo. But they were there and experienced the U.S. pavilion, and all kinds of other pavilions were also prominent because of their geometric sort of structure types of buildings. So it's interesting that Smalley and Kroto might even had coffee in the same coffee shop, but didn't even know who they were, who each other was at the time.
Right on. They were Nobel Prize winners, right?
Yeah, the third person was Robert Curl.
Yeah.
And Kroto was from the University of Sussex in England, and Smalley was from the Rice University in Houston, and I think Curl was too. Yeah, it's and that's so. And for me personally, I was interested in the dome, but I had no idea, what it was other than a great big circular building and a train that ran through it. And I'd never ever heard of Fuller. Wouldn't have had the slightest idea who he was. And yet that was almost the beginning of me starting to really start to question about systems theory and why people couldn't answer my question about how many parts does it take to make a system. I was asking those questions in the 63 to 67 time period. And I didn't get introduced to Fuller's work for another 10 years.
Cool. So 68, if you're complete, we'll move ahead.
Yeah. Well, there we are in 68, though. We've got Stuart Brand founds the whole Earth catalog. So it may well have been that he was one of the first to publish that Earthrise picture.
Yeah.
And I've got it noted there now.
Yeah, and the picture, the catalog I showed on the screen was 1970.
Yeah.
So that was a mature version of it, because I think I
Right.
remember an earlier one that wasn't so professional.
Right. And then again in 68, to see the tragedy of King's assassination in April, and then again Kennedy's in June at the leading up to the Democratic convention. It's so kind of memorialized, connected to today. The other thing, it's in 1960, not in 1968, that is now significant in terms of what happened last week, is that in 1968, that was the last time somebody who was the sort of designated candidate for a major party, in this case the Democratic Party, backed off and quit. And that was what's his name, Lyndon Johnson. But he didn't quit the way Biden quit. He was basically forced to quit.
Yeah.
So it was a totally different phenomena, even though it was the last time something like that happened.
there's a lot of inside people saying that Biden was getting more and more and more pressure to quit, but Jill, his wife, didn't want him to quit. Okay, so we're
Yeah.
ready to,
Well, I love the scenario that he did it all very deliberately, and he suckered Trump into his convention and his pick, and then and waited to say, okay, checkmate, I quit. So now guess who's the oldest guy who's suffering from dementia and whatever else you might want to throw at him.
I hadn't heard about that, Richard. That's an interesting perspective that he was keeping it quiet until after the Republican committed to the JD Vance dude. That's interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, I like that story, so I'm going to run with it.
You're gonna stick with it. Yeah, might as well. When you got a good story, dude, stick with it.
Yeah. Uh,
So Joe, do you want to continue? Are we ready to move ahead?
Sure. First humans on moon. First remote sensing satellite. Single gene isolated. Enzyme synthesized. Structure of gamma glib blue
Globulin.
globulin.
globulin
Yep.
Deciphered. Fiber optics, microwaves, fluid fluidics or
Ludics.
fluidics.
Okay, we got some more 69 stuff here from Richard. Let's see here. Fuller leads the first public world game workshop. It's funny he doesn't mention his stuff here,
Yeah.
because honestly, I think that would be impactful to have that in the context of the single gene isolated and the enzyme synthesized and structure of gamma globulin deciphered and fiber optics, microwaves and fluidics. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing in terms of how commonplace some of those are today.
Yeah. As opposed to world game, which is not so commonplace.
Yeah.
And you mentioned he delivers his lecture on planetary planning. And he talked about that in the the Critical Path book for India and Brazil, I think. And then something was going on over here with our friend Richard. What the heck was going on over here?
Well, that was rather interesting. When I first started work in Windsor, Ontario, I was green as grass, and I was working with a lot of men who were experienced in and out of prison, and they knew how to con, and they conned me out of my bootstraps quite regularly. One of them was a person who was convicted of fraudulent activities and had been in penitentiaries several times. And so I worked with him, and then I moved to the other city. And in the meantime, he got himself into trouble again and was sent back to prison. And then he wrote me in my new place and said, I can get out on good time, but I have to have a supervisor, and would you do it? And so I said I would. And I was just learning a little bit about Albert Ellis's rational emotive therapy, which is very highly cognitive sort of based. And anyway, this man came to Ottawa, and he started to slip into his old ways very quickly. And so I told him, if you take one more step in that direction, I'm going to breach your parole, and I'm going to put you back into the 1840s dungeon jail in the city. So he did that, and on the eve of Good Friday, I called him on what I said I was going to do. And then I called the local jail and I said, you know, you've got to take this guy in right now, today, this afternoon. They said, we don't want to because it's a whole bunch of paperwork and it's Good Friday, for God's sake. You know, can't you wait till Tuesday? And I said, no, I said I was going to do it and I'm doing it. Uh, anyway, I sat down with him and I said, you know, if you come out, we're going to do something different. And so I said, we're going to do exactly what we're doing right now. We're going to read a book by Ellis, page by page, every week that we meet, and then we're going to discuss it and see whether or not you can learn from it. And that's what we did, and it started to work. And I was then invited by a criminology class to deliver a lecture to them, their criminology students. And I said, well, yeah, I'd like to, but I can't come because I have this standing appointment at exactly the time you want me at your classroom. And then I went back to them because of something that I had learned or witnessed in Montreal, where psychiatrists were interviewing patients in front of an auditorium of onlookers, and the patients were quite okay with it. So I said, well, wait a minute. Actually, if he agrees with me, I'll have this week's appointment in your class if you want. And they agreed to it. And we were in an old house, so it was a kind of like a living room environment. I was sitting across the corner of the dining room table, and the class was around. It wasn't a big class. And so I went through our daily session. And afterwards, the instructor said to the students, well, what did you think of that interview? And they almost crucified me. They said it was it was bad, it was terrible, there was no empathy, there was no care, there was no this, no that. So I turned to him and I said, well, now go ask the client and see what he thinks. And he praised me to the rafters, because he said, that's what I need. I need to be held accountable in the way in which that sort of approach helps me stay accountable. And he actually stayed on the street. He became a postal sort of employee at some point. He worked his way up through the union and became a union leader. And I don't think he ever did go back. But so it was a great kind of a success story for me. And they were just starting up this new journal, and I did a case study of the two of us wrote it together, and I submitted it, and they accepted it as one of the lead articles in their first edition. So that was another, you know, mark on what do you call them? Sort of a score for me, which at that time was quite impressive to be able to get published in a journal.
Very cool. Well, I got published in a journal that soon after that, because in 1969, Good Things by the Toads was a 45 RPM record. I wrote the song, and it was published.
Oh,
We had a #1 hit record in Utah. It was being played on the Sunset Strip at the Hullabaloo and several other clubs. And in this book, Riot on Sunset Strip, Rock and Roll's Last Stand in Hollywood.
yeah.
It's
Wow.
written up and says Good Things by the Toads captures the back alley spirit of the Sunset Strip in 1969.
Wow, that's exciting.
Not as exciting as yours, Richard. But, you know, and this came like years after. This book wasn't, I didn't even know about this. And somebody said, hey, you're mentioned in this book. This book was published in, well, I can't find the stupid publication date. But it was published some years later, and it's got here's Buffalo Springfield album on the front cover over here. And here's people dancing at the Hullabaloo. And here's the Whiskey A Go-Go.
Wow.
That's where I went in 1969 and heard Van Morrison play on stage Gloria, which the words were so racy that the only cities that song was played in was San Diego and LA, because it talked about Gloria would come up into his room at midnight and make feel so good. It'd make him feel all right. None of the radio stations would play that except San Diego and LA. And that's where I heard Van Morrison sing, and that's when I got enough guts to sing.
Hmm.
And then I got to then I got to see Van Morrison in person. And on stage with Van Morrison was a group called Captain Beefheart. And they did a tune called Diddy Wah Diddy, and he played harmonica and it knocked my socks off. I went out and bought a B flat harmonica, and to this day, I will do Diddy Wah Diddy in my rock concerts.
Oh,
It's a really cool song. I'll drop the link in the chat. So anyway, that's 69. Any other comments or questions? And did I cut you off, Richard? Is there anything that you did have a birth of a daughter there?
yeah. Our first daughter was born in Ottawa. And then when we left Ottawa in October, November, our second daughter would have been born in Ottawa, but she waited until we got to Edmonton. And my first day on the job was November 1st, I guess, or it must have been November 2nd. And Halloween that year was on the Saturday night, October 31st.
You want me to change that to November 2?
Yeah, you could change that. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I arrived at work with my brand new suit on and trying to be look like the new kid. And I no sooner got there, and I could smell smoke throughout the building. And I was confronted with the challenge that two kids set fire to the place on Saturday night after some kind of Halloween event, and they want to know what we were going to do with them. In other words, like charge them and send them to juvenile court, or pat them on the back and say, don't do that again. And it was like, don't ask me, I just work here. And the other, I remember the feeling that, oh my God, I should never have left Ottawa. This is way too much for me. But being 2,000 or 3,000 miles away was too far to turn around. So that was my first day on the job. It was not what I'll call an auspicious day. But it certainly got me orientated to the nature of the work right away.
Yeah. Great.
Teenage kids are not an easy group to work with and to kind of stay in tune with. And
I don't know why you would say that, because I
probably,
can tell you my Halloween story. And in Halloween of '62, we were out throwing eggs at cars, and a big giant group of people from Escondido High School showed up at this dance that we're having downtown, and the fire department was called out, and they squirted us down with fire hoses to get us to break up the crowd.
yeah,
So that's my Halloween story.
right.
Okay,
You were
Joe,
one of those bad
tell
kids.
me,
Yeah.
what's that?
So you were one of those bad kids.
I was just a normal high school kid in 1961. What can I say?
Yeah,
You were ready to go to graduate school, and I was just, I had a '49 Chevy and
yeah.
I could drive around town. I was kind of loose. Joe, what's your worst Halloween nightmare?
Oh, geez. I haven't had too many nightmares per
Did you
se on
burn down a
Halloween.
building?
I might say that just to sound cool.
Just to keep up with Richard.
Yeah, at this point, it's just um Yeah, I did. I burned
Yeah,
down a whole.
You actually burned
bet-
down that building and blamed it on those two kids that Richard had.
Exactly. And I haven't,
Afraid of.
it doesn't feel bad. I don't feel badly at all. So it shows you I have no conscience. So, no, actually, I don't have any, specific Halloween stories.
Okay,
Trying to think, actually.
Yeah.
I'll just say this.
okay,
Yeah, with Halloween, the one thing is, when I was giving out candy, it was really nice to see some of the kids that were really grateful.
I hear you.
They really stuck out. Um, and yeah, I still remember that some of them because some are looking at what you're giving them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And others are just looking at, they're just excited to get something
Yeah.
and they're very thankful. And
Yeah,
uh,
let me just speak to something like that, Joe. When I was in India in 1994, I was there in October, and they have a Halloween kind of event. Only it's the reverse of what we uh, have sort of grown up with in North America, the trick and treat kind of idea. This one was more on basically on the treat side, and in the fall, the young people would go and gather fallen leaves, golden leaves,
mhm,
and the custom was to go around knocking on doors, not to ask for treats, but to express gratitude to somebody for something they did.
hmm,
Uh, and I was asked. I met some students who came from the lowest caste of India, who were DEIs at this university, and one of them's mother lived in one of the largest slum communities in Southeast Asia, or in South Asia at the time, in Bombay.
mhm,
And so he said, I want you to come home for this evening. And I asked my mother, and she said it's okay. And it was also at the time of the plague that had hit India. And we were all told to stay away from the slums and stay away from hospitals.
right.
And I had a tough decision to decide whether or not I would decline the invitation. I didn't. I took it, and I got to this little 12 by 12 house in the middle of the slum, and the mother had cooked the meal, and she had a younger son and this other son who was in graduate school, and that was the evening that the older son had been a tutor for young kids in the neighborhood. And so they came by in streams to give their gratitude and their thanks to this young student for taking time out in his evenings to tutor them in the over the course of the previous year, I guess. So it was really a remarkable sort of custom to experience the kind of thing
Sure.
you were just talking about of knocking on doors to share your gratitude for something or for what somebody has done for you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that expressing gratitude, and also it's a thing, it shows the right um values being celebrated. Um, so and that's always reassuring. So yeah, I agree with you. Those types of events, you remember them. I mean, I still vividly remember a lot of especially, some of the kids that were really grateful. So, um, yeah, it's, the little things matter.
Mhm.
They really do, stick with you. Much of what I find
to be the most important thing about virtue ethics in general is to change the input. And so we can control how we respond, and that changes not just us, but it also has an impact on those around us. So here's a younger child that's many of them that I still remember because of
Cool.
their gratitude. So
Let's finish off 1971. Did we do 70 completion? I think,
no,
1970, right?
yep, that's where we are.
My,
Venera 7 spacecraft makes soft landing on Venus. I don't know if I said that correctly, but close enough. Boeing 747 jumbo jet. That's interesting. Completion of gene synthesis. Largest fully steerable dish radio telescope. Actually, can I just do 71 really quickly?
yeah. Let's finish 71 and let's get done.
Yeah, first synthesis of hormone. Well,
I went too fast, my friend.
there we go.
Here we go.
First, the synthesis of hormone responsible for human growth. First man-made object to orbit another planet, Mars.
Then,
The moon soil brought back. It's interesting how much he's focused on the space program, in a sense, for a lot of good reasons, obviously.
yeah, you'd probably be a fan of Elon.
I imagine, yeah.
Okay, so let's finish off 71 here. You were the Alberta Association Council elected council member for the social
Right.
workers. Cool. And you were the chair.
Beginnings of my political career.
Ah,
And I, well, no, it was when I ran for president a year or so later, I wanted to encourage the principle of democracy. So I said, here's my platform. I'm going to run on this platform until I'm defeated. And in inviting people to sort of, you should take up the challenge and you should come up with your good ideas, and you should, there should be a number of candidates running for the position to make it really democratic. Well, I got fooled. The idea was, if you're sucker enough to sort of stand up there and be the elected president, we're quite willing to leave you there forever if you want. So it was sort of the reverse of, what's his name? Trump saying, I'm going to be dictator for a day and forever after. I said, I'm going to try and be democratic to start everything off, and you've got to come and get me, type of thing, in terms of a challenge. And they said, fine, stay there. You can be dictator forever if you want. Yeah,
wow.
that it's just another idea of how precarious this concept of democracy really is. Yeah, it's,
But there's a big discussion in America, or at least among some sectors, about the fact that they discontinued civics classes in the 70s or 80s. And so all these kids now roaming around have no idea about civic responsibilities whatsoever.
That's
And
a problem.
totally amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
and the first email sent over ARPANET.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's a great way to end 1971.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Joe, how
Wow,
are you
I didn't
feeling?
know it was that late, actually. I thought it was would have been a little bit earlier than that because it was essentially started between universities, right? As a way of communicating in the event of a nuclear war, from what I understood.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
So that I'm surprised it was all the way till 71 they uh that they sent the first email.
So Joe, how are you feeling and what are your takeaways if we're ready to end this?
Yeah. It was great to be with everybody this evening. Um, I feel like I've actually, learned a little bit more about both of you, and I appreciate that. That's part of the experience of going through this. Is actually not only just knowing about what Bucky had thought, but seeing where you are at this particular moment in time, and hearing about your experiences. Uh, one of my other takeaways was obviously just um, how important the space program was. I had revisited it in reading a book recently, and I'd mentioned to um, and some of the kind of the ideas that we were going to get to the moon and that it was a mission-based economy or mission-based uh, with the idea of getting to the moon, and many people feel like that's what we need in order to address the climate crisis right now, is essentially a mission approach where um, that uh, much of the work that we could do is, would be productive both for, um, the economic health, uh, as well as the environment's health. And I think that that really aligns well with what Bucky was all about. So from that perspective, it's an interesting connection. Um, because yeah, again, a lot of innovation had come out of that program. So yeah, I mean, so that was an interesting thing to revisit for me. But again, yeah, I really enjoyed my time tonight, and it was good to hear um, and go through what Richard had written down um, and Steve what you shared. So uh, part of this process is not only just to focus on what Bucky did, but also to focus on um, some of the things that we found important so that we know each other a little bit better. So Richard, how are you feeling? What are you taking away from this evening?
Well, I'm like you. I feel pretty good about it, and I I really um, like the idea of being able to go through this chronofile the way we have, but also to begin to interweave um, sort of milestones, in this case in Fuller's life, um, and interconnect them with our own. And um, I mean, you can almost you can see the value of each of us doing something like that. Um, but you can see the additional value if, let's say, just using 3 or 4 people to um, intersperse their own interweavings in the way in which Steve has uh, a number of times on that chronofile document, and And that's really quite striking, I think, for us to learn about each other in those kind of interweaving ways through different milestones that are either anchored to our own particular milestones or anchored to a common one that we all kind of relate to, in this case, Bucky's. But yeah, so it's been great. I'm, you know, you sometimes you sort of feel like, oh my God, we just got through one page, but there's so much richness in that one page that it's worth the time of spending in sharing and talking and thinking about it. So Steve, and how are you feeling, and what's your takeaway this evening?
Well, I'm thinking about something that Joe said, and I just got this flash on something you just said, and I'm not convinced that I can remember what Joe said, but I think that that I've already talked about the value of the chronophile, and certainly your Word document and me being able to insert some stuff along the way, and feeling a little bit weird because nobody else is inserting stuff, it's just me and you. And then Joe proclaiming that he hadn't been born yet, so he had nothing to insert. But I think it's totally justified. I don't know, Joe, if you'd be feeling guilty about that, but I think you're totally justified.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do remember your comment that was so astute to me, was how important the space program was to Bucky,
Right.
because he mentions that a lot. And he also is big on heavy metals. I don't know, and I think probably that's all around the fullerene, probably, right? Because he was, I think that has something to do with his fullerene. He doesn't say why beliminium is important, but I'm sure that had something to do with it. But and the space program died about the time that this book came out.
Mm.
And
That's
been
right.
dormant for 40 years.
That's right.
I think Elon Musk would be Bucky's favorite guy.
I think so.
Get off the planet, and just all the conversations about, okay, if we do get off the planet, then what? And what does it take to create a sustainable society on Mars? Right? If you listen to any of Elon's YouTube things on his conversation, it's really profound. How many tons of crap is needed, and how many thousands of flights per year will be needed to make sure that that the Mars outpost doesn't die if suddenly there are no more flights. Which I don't know if that does anything for you, but it brings me back to Stranger in a Strange Land by Heinrich Heinlein, which is over here on my Robert Heinlein, which is over here on my shelf, and one of my favorite all-time books, Stranger in a Strange Land. So I'm loving this. I'm loving it. And Richard, we certainly, I think if Ann were here right now, I mean, the whole idea of engaging the teacher as a facilitator rather than as a presenter. And of course, that's what but with your chronophile document, that's what you have kind of like initiated here is, okay, we go down and read through all of Bucky's things, but we're pausing, we're taking a look at it, we're inserting our own things. Bucky, because of your invitation, I think, Richard, Bucky is bringing about an opportunity for us to look at the ways we're connected and the ways we're not connected.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So exciting time for me. And I thought we'd be through with it tonight, but next week we come back for maybe the final page if we're lucky enough to get through it. And then we'll see what we're going to do from there. You guys are my favorite.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Thank you very, very much, Joe. Thanks for being up this late, my friend. It's 1 o'clock there.
Yeah, I know. It's been a day.
Yeah, it's been a day. So thank you for hanging in with us.
All right, take care.
See you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.
Bye.